Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending our session today. And we'll be presenting ESG reporting and value creation through internal audit. Now, before we do that, I want to provide a brief introduction of all our presenters and my colleagues as well. So to provide a brief introduction, again, I'm Janis Parthun, a VP within RGP's Project Consulting Services team. I lead a number of cross-functional initiatives within finance, accounting, and risk and compliance. And in terms of background and experience, I bring a number of experience in finance and technology process design, reporting implementations pertaining to standards and frameworks, and driving continuous improvement for companies. And prior to that, I was the director at another accounting firm leading global and regional accounts and engagements within the risk consulting practice. And then before that, I was with the AICPA advocating the importance of IT and accounting to the accounting profession at large. A little bit about RGP. RGP is a global consulting company that serves over 2,200 clients, which includes 88 of the Fortune 100. And RGP enables rapid business outcomes by bringing together the right people who together create transformative change. Now I'm going to pass over to my colleagues here to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. This is Ian Burnett. I am a VP in the Risk and Compliance practice and joined RGP in 2019. I come with a long history of GRC experience. Most of my experience has been in risk advisory roles at CPA firms, including Big Four and next tier firms. I also spent time in industry in key internal audit and risk roles. And I support all industries really across the country and over into Europe with internal control and internal audit matters. So we're excited to bring this topic to you today. And I'll pass it over to Jaime Gutierrez for a quick introduction.
Thank you so much, Ian. And my name is Jaime Gutierrez, and good morning, and thanks for joining our webinar. I'm one of the leaders of our risk and compliance practice. I have 20 years experience advising global and national organizations. My expertise includes helping organizations to improve the risk management programs and also optimizing the compliance functions as part of integral part of the business. Prior to RGP, I held various leadership roles as a chief audit executive, and I help and work with the board members to help them to strategize in terms of risk and how to balance the risk among the three lines of defense. I also started my career as in the Big Four, and I help also to improve an organization in the performance side of the business. Welcome to our webinar, and look forward to continue listening your comments.
Great, thank you both for providing the introduction. And we have a great agenda here today. So what I'm going to start off with is providing a brief introduction to ESG reporting to provide a little bit of baseline, talk about the ESG reporting drivers, and then Jaime and Ian are going to come in and talk about how can internal audit help and add value. So a lot of great content here for today's discussion. But before we do that, before the introduction, we have our first polling question. So we don't want to forget that. Our first polling question here is, which organizational function do you currently represent? Is it finance, internal audit, legal, sourcing or procurement, audit committee member or board, or other? So we'll just give you a little bit of time to answer that and just provide us a little bit of background too, as well as what role you're representing at our session today. And we have the responses back. It looks like majority of you internal audit and finance, and a few others selecting the others. So great, well, welcome. Thank you for participating. We'll move to the next Okay. So in terms of just providing a brief introduction, ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And this topic isn't new. Over 90% of the SP 500 already voluntarily publish sustainability reports in some sort of form or fashion. But there's been increasing funds and investments around this topic as well. 120 billion net new money in Q1 and Q2 for this year internationally focused on sustainability funds. And actually now it's 140 billion up to Q3 in total. 370 billion invested to target emissions reduction with the Inflation Reduction Act. So you can see here there's significant interest to invest and report, and proponents say that the company's ESG efforts may influence how you purchase and invest in that company, and companies may want to be able to share how they're acting responsibly with their employees, customers, suppliers, and the environment. But there are also critics, such as the ESG ratings developed that ranks companies on how they're performing on ESG factors, which it can create some frustration for some companies, depending on where you're sitting at. And the other aspect is the question of the fund or the investment that is labeled with ESG. So you can see the plus and minuses around this topic here. What I like to initially first provide is really just more of a brief background around ESG reporting and the reporting work streams associated, and then talk about the drivers in the next section. So you can see here when companies are having to include ESG information in the financial statements, they do tend to be regulatory driven. And then on the right, beyond the financials, the reporting work stream is more strategic in nature, and when companies are sharing ESG efforts in their sustainability reports or on their websites. So I just want to spend about 5 minutes initially talking about some of the initial baseline around some of the standards and frameworks, and then dive deeper in the discussions after that. So the first one I'll mention here is Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI, which is widely used standard for sustainability reporting. And it's structured by a specific topic along with defined metrics to report on. And the topic-specific standards help guide and recommend companies on reporting disclosures and metrics to consider. And although the organization has plans to develop more industry-specific guidance, at this time it's really only a few, and so the majority of it is topic-specific. And looking at, you can see the figure 1 and the topic listed, for example, you really have to start out with the foundation and the general disclosures, but then after that, it does dive, you have the option to be able to select more topic-specific disclosures, and it depends on the topic that's important for you. So, for example, if you want to talk about the topic of diversity, or if diversity is important to your organization, then you would refer to topic 405, diversity, and present the diversity of the governance bodies and employees as a percentage by gender, by age group, or other indicators. And then as well as provide metrics on the ratio of a base salary versus, as well as compensation of women to men for each of these employee categories. And this is just an example illustration. Now, when it comes to SASB, which is another standard that's often frequently referred to, Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, the focus is on guiding the disclosure on financially material sustainability information by companies to their investors. And now it's also part of the IFRS Foundation, as well as the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB, oversight, starting this year. This is structured by industry classification and focused on financially material metrics and guidance, and it's suggested topic for the industry and describes specific accounting metrics to consider reporting on. So you can see in this illustration on the top, you can also see in terms of just at the header, there's the topic. Once the industry is identified, there's the topic, there's the accounting metric, And then there's some additional protocol to consider in association with that. And from an industry perspective, SASB provides additional industry categories to consider. And so, for example, in this case, you can see the consumer goods. There are 7 additional category variations to consider. Now, there's also been significant discussion in the past for companies to disclose on climate-related risk and emissions. And of course, the SEC proposal brought this topic front and center. But before I provide more of that information in the next section, I just thought I'd share some background as you hear references on Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. Now, from a Scope 1 perspective, the Scope 1 emissions are direct greenhouse gas emissions that occurs from the sources controlled or owned by the organization. So this may be emissions associated with the fuel combustion in boilers, furnaces, and vehicles. Scope 2 emissions are indirect greenhouse emissions associated with the purchase of electricity, steam, heat, and cooling. And then Scope 3 emissions are the results of the activities that assets are not owned or controlled by the reporting organization, but the organization indirectly impacts its value chain. And this tends to be the largest contribution of emissions for many of the organizations. Now, for climate-specific standards and framework, I just want to be able to call out these 3 here. There's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, or TCFD, which develops the recommendation on information that companies should disclose to support external stakeholders in assessing risks related to climate change. There's the Greenhouse Protocol, which provides framework to measure and manage the emissions from private and public sector operations in the value chain. There's the Science-Based Target Initiative, which defines and promotes best practices in emissions reductions and the net zero targets in line with climate science. So these are a variety of the standards and frameworks that you may have already heard or that you'll be hearing in our session today. Okay, so after that introduction, we have our second polling question. And this is also just for us to be able to have a little bit more understanding what stage your organization is at. So at what stage is your organization reporting on ESG matters? Our organization has a robust and comprehensive ESG program. Our organization report and disclose on certain ESG initiatives on our website. Our organization exploring ways to expand and formalize our ESG program. I am not involved in the ESG efforts in our organization. So we'll give it just a little bit of time so that you can be able to provide your response. Okay, great. This is an interesting perspective in that it seems like a large portion of you, you have some reporting or disclosure on your initiatives on your website, or you're exploring ways to expand, formalizing your program. And where there are also a large portion of you not involved in this, but may have interest to get involved. So interesting to see that. All right.
It's a great information, Janis, because at the end of the day, all this process and information is evolving around ESG, and we can see majority of our clients just navigating in these 2 that you just mentioned.
Yes, that's very helpful information. So thank you for responding to that. All right. So next, I really like to just talk about from a regulatory driver perspective, and then some of the strategic drivers, so that at least we can dive a little bit deeper into some of the reasons in hearing more about ESG reporting, as well as the impact to you. Now, I'll first talk about the recent regulatory drivers, as these are directly impacting the financial statements. And regulatory and standard setting bodies are really paying attention to how companies are reporting on ESG matters. So from a human capital disclosure perspective for public companies, the SEC is already requiring companies to include human capital disclosure in the financials. When it comes to proposed, we have the climate-related disclosures. As many of you are already aware, in March, the SEC proposed rules to enhance and standardize climate-related disclosures as the investment community is demanding for more consistent, comparable, and reliable information across companies. Although interesting enough, the SEC also ran into system issues earlier this year, and so they reopened the comment period in October to make sure that all comments were submitted. I think many of us are anticipating that the SEC will likely announce something in the Q1 of next year. So we're all on the lookout for that, but I will discuss this in a little bit more detail in the next slide. We also have the proposed cybersecurity proposal as well, and I'll just touch upon that just briefly. From cybersecurity risk perspective, it's becoming even more prevalent. So the SEC has issued a proposal to enhance its disclosures regarding cybersecurity risk management and incident reporting for public companies, and specifically to report material cybersecurity instances within 4 business days of confirming. Now, from a standard setting change perspective, there's the financial reporting and accounting standard changes that's applicable to all U.S., public, private, nonprofits. And this is for the accounting for environmental credit programs, and it's a new topic for FASB's agenda to assess the requirements for participants in compliance and voluntary programs that lead to the creation of environmental credits. And mainly it's because there's been a lot of diversity in the practice and without much strict guidance. The credits include the credits that are part of emissions trading, renewable energy credits, and carbon offset credits. And although the focus of the credits are ones that are enforceable and traded, and it's still in the early deliberations, I just want to bring this up for awareness because organizations are increasingly engaging ways to be able to reduce their carbon emissions. Now, on the international front, the IFRS Foundation created the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB, and this is focused on the sustainability-related disclosures to be able to help investors make informed decisions about ESG matters. And the exposure drafts issued included general sustainability-related disclosures, and it's setting out for overall requirements for an entity to disclose. And then there's also the climate-related disclosures, building upon recommendations from the TCFD. Now, the ISSB is currently in the final deliberations, but I also do want to clarify that the focus of ISSB's guidance is to focus on disclosures that may have financial materiality. So it's similar to IFRS, and it's also part of IFRS Foundation as well. Now, when the ISSB standards are officially issued, these are not mandated unless the country or the jurisdictional authority decides that the companies should comply. But interesting enough, this shift towards broader ESG compliance, so moving towards beyond the financial statements, is really starting to happen internationally. So from the UK perspective, there's the Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting, or CCAR, which requires public companies to specifically disclose UK annual energy use and greenhouse emissions, starting back in 2019. There's also the TCFD disclosure requirements that requires public, large private, and certain LLP companies to incorporate TCFD-aligned climate disclosures in their annual reports. This started this year, 2022. Now, in the EU, there's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD, and this one's a really big one. The EU has recently adopted this new rule, and for companies soon to publish detailed information on sustainability matters to increase a company's accountability and prevent divergent sustainability standards. And this is to be effective starting in fiscal year 2024, depending on the category of the company. And I'll highlight that in the next slide. Okay, so I mentioned earlier in March, the SEC proposed rules to enhance and standardize the climate-related disclosures as the investment community is demanding for more consistent, comparable, and reliable information across companies. Now, the proposed disclosures specifically on climate-related risk would require public companies to disclose specific content when submitting the filing in registration statements or annual reports, depending on the timing. And this includes having to provide oversight, material impact to the business and future outlooks, process to identify, assess, and manage the risk, greenhouse gas emissions, the impact of the climate-related events, and this includes disclosing financial impact when summed cumulatively greater than 1% of a financial statement line item, details on climate-related targets or goals publicly set, and other information such as scenario analysis or transition plans that's been defined. And this also means information disclosed would be subject to SEC's rules on the disclosure controls and procedures, as well as being tagged in line XBRL. So for larger organizations or accelerated and large accelerated filers, the additional requirement is to have to obtain the attestation report from an independent attestation service provider on the Scope 1 and Scope 2 missions. And the SEC proposal includes a phased approach for implementation, as I'm sharing right here. And I would say the elements that are the most sensitive for registrants, or it's causing stirs for many of the companies that I've been speaking to, are really the limited and reasonable assurance requirements and calculating the financial impacts to the climate-related events. Now, we've also published a blog here and provide a little bit more detail under our RGB Insights. But if the audience here is interested to learn more, please take a look. And I would say also, now to be prepared, you should also assess how ready your company is for the SEC proposal, such as by evaluating the current accounting policies and procedures to support the climate-related disclosures and the developments of that. And RGP can help in terms of with our technical accounting team and be able to provide the research and the policy development. Now next, as I mentioned earlier, the EU has recently adopted this rule for companies to publish detailed information on sustainability matters to increase a company's accountability to prevent the divergent standards effective in fiscal year 2024. And the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, or the EFRAG, are responsible for developing the draft European standards and have developed associated standards in the architecture presented here. And in terms of who this applies to, you can see here, in terms of the first two, companies listed on the EU regulated market and large European companies or parent of the European large group. But the third one here, non-EU companies or subsidiaries of non-EU parent companies who meet the following criteria. So this would possibly pertain to a US company that's not as part of the EU, but may have subsidiaries that meet these criteria. And that includes having a net turnover revenue greater than 150 million euros and at least having a subsidiary or branch in the EU that meets these other two criteria listed. And it is going to be effective starting for fiscal 2024, but depends on the category of the company that you're in. All right. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit more on the strategic drivers and transitioning more to the right. So in terms of with sustainability reporting and having a more formal ESG program can really be able to help you set clear strategic goals and expectations that are recognizable by a broader audience, and be able to hold management and internal stakeholders more accountable. So whether you represent a public or private organization, having structure can be able to help you better communicate ESG efforts and progress to the community. And this can be also include investors at large and other stakeholders such as creditors and customers. Now, diving deeper into the strategic drivers, internal and external stakeholders are increasingly demand organizations to share and disclose their ESG efforts. And this may be from employees to customers to the investors and creditors. So for example, in healthcare, the social aspect of ESG is inherent and has been part of the organization's mission for many, such as supporting the underserved communities. But more recently, the other aspects, environmental and governance, are gaining traction. And interesting enough, from the external stakeholder perspective, ESG considerations are increasingly being identified explicitly. So for example, in credit rating methodologies as components of healthcare or health system wider performance, according to the Foundation of American College of Healthcare Executives. Now in retail, customers are increasingly wanting to know how companies are addressing ESG concerns. According to the Global Data's Market Pulse Consumer Survey in 2020, customers are more likely to pay a premium for sustainability-aligned causes, and 81% of the customers would be willing to pay more for products supporting environmental protection. It's important to understand and set the goals and targets specific to your industry or organization. But what does this mean? This means your priorities should be customized to your organization's industry profile. And once the priorities are established, drill down further and understand what specific metric goals and targets are relevant to the priorities for your business model. For a retail organization, this may be more specific goals to consider based on what your organization offers and your business model. From multi-line e-commerce to apparel goods with brick and mortar locations, each would have different impacts to consider, and as a result, differing goals and targets to consider. Now, to drill down the example a little bit more, for e-commerce, this may be focusing on product packaging and distribution to customer privacy, such as discussing strategies to reduce the environmental impact of product delivery to quantifying the emissions of the footprint of the product shipments, or the descriptions of policies and procedures relating to behavioral advertising and user privacy. But with apparel goods, the organization may be more interested in raw material sourcing to labor conditions and production of the apparel or fashion, such as quantifying the percentage of the raw materials that are third-party certified to an environmental or social sustainability standard, or including the percentage of supplier facilities that are audited to a labor code of conduct, or the percentage of total audits conducted internally, with the goals to increase that percentage. Now, shifting to healthcare providers, this may be supporting underserved communities to monitor employee health and safety, such as discussing the strategy to manage or support the mix of patient insurance status, to sharing employee safety data, such as the total recordable incident rate, to days away, restricted and transferred rate, or focusing on the supplier diversity and conducting supplier social assessments and disclosing that number of participating suppliers. But with life sciences and pharma, this may also be focusing on the safety of clinical trials to supply chain in the development of the drugs. And so examples may be having to discuss by region, the management's process for ensuring the quality and the patient safety of the clinical trials and disclosing the number of FDA sponsor inspections, to quantifying the percentage of suppliers' facilities participating in audit programs, and with goals to increase that percentage. So while you may already communicate a number of these initiatives, having structure and a framework can also help you communicate and convey these efforts and hold your organization more accountable. Investors or other stakeholders will also want to understand how organizations are holding themselves accountable, setting the appropriate metrics, and monitoring progress and performance. Now, depending on the maturity of your organization, ESG reporting program, you may either need help first having to establish the structure or executing on the program, or just helping reconcile presenting the reporting efforts with the current sustainability standards and frameworks. And RGP can help with our operational reporting program and team. Now, what I'd like to share next is the typical ESG reporting roadmap that companies undergo, at least from a sustainability reporting perspective. So these stages include prioritizing the topics and determining materiality, and this is driven by stakeholder and market input, industry profile, business strategy, and suggested standards. And to add context around materiality, this may be the financial materiality or impact materiality, or both. It really depends on the company's strategic approach and which standards that the organization is aligning to. Now, setting targets and goals. Identifying setting target goals and metrics to priority or material topics. Determining the baseline for initial measure. Executing on reporting and related disclosures. Having to establish the process and oversight to have accountability and report or update related performance metrics. Establishing quality control and program management. Having to establish the process or the program to ensure quality control of the data collected for reporting purposes. And reevaluating set priorities and topics. So at the end of the cycle, you want to be able to reevaluate your set priorities and target goals on a periodic basis to ensure that there's continuous alignment to the business strategy. Now I have this red circle here below this roadmap, and what I wanted to just be able to communicate here is that what I've noticed that companies more often really encounter the challenges during the midpoint stages of executing the ESG reporting roadmap. So to dive a little bit deeper, the typical challenges that organizations experience include adhering to the standards and the frameworks when reporting across multiple standards and frameworks, and trying to stay current and up to date with the changes and the new releases that are happening. And this includes, for example, the TCFD issued new recommendations in October and needing to understand the degree of changes. And if the company's reporting, for example, to CDP a global environmental disclosure system, how the 2020 CDP questionnaire changed in connection to that. The other aspect is program management and governance, and having to be able to establish the structure and program for that, tracking the goals and the measurements associated with it, and having to be able to make sure that this is accountable. Now, from a data quality management perspective, having comfort and the quality of the metrics and data collected and reported. For example, is the information collected comprehensive to the metric being tracked, such as inclusive of relevant regions and markets, or is the information reliable, such as is it trackable or includes supporting details? Now, if your organization has established related accounting policies and have a reporting program structure, whether pre-existing processes or implementation of new processes, you'll also want to consider the risk associated, such as the data governance and the data quality. And internal audit can help to improve the maturity of the ESG reporting program. So what I'd like to do next is share our next polling question and learn a little bit about your concerns when it comes to ESG initiatives. And then we'll transition to Jaime to talk about how internal audit can help. So which area are you most concerned about when it comes to the ESG initiatives? Regulatory or standard setting changes, ability to collect the data and the data quality, managing the program across stakeholders, or the lack of systems or tools to support, or other. So we'll give it a little bit of time here. So interesting enough, a significant number of you have mentioned the ability to collect the data and the data quality and managing the program across the stakeholders. So that's great insight here. Jaime, anything to chime in on in the response?
It seems to be consistent with what actually are seeing in the market, and is one of the main concerns from the companies, how they're going to be getting in the data and the accuracy of the data. So certainly is kind of a reflecting one of the concerns from the finance community in this case.
Yeah, Janis, and we had a question come in about noting key challenges with data, and I don't know if there's any additional comments we can provide on that. It certainly will be a key area of focus as this regulatory area progresses, and we'll have more thoughts on that to share as we continue the presentation. So, but certainly it is a key area. So I'm not surprised that came up as a key response item here in polling question 3.
Great, and yes, you're right, and I'm really excited to hear the next portion of the session, and there are a lot of great questions that to share with all of you to help you think about how you can better manage your data from a data collection process perspective. So really excited for the next segment. Okay. Great. All right. Jaime, I'm going to kick it off to you.
Thank you much, Janis. So there's a lot of things just flowing around in terms of how come internal audit can help in this process. And one of the things that I would like to do in this presentation is to help you to ask yourself some questions that is going to help you to position internal audit in your company. Because what we're seeing here is we have different sites in terms of where the company stands. There are some companies that seems to be a little bit more mature from the ESG perspective or the social responsibility, or they've done some type of work, and internal audit has participated in this process before. But there are other side of auditors and companies that they have not started yet, and they're just figuring out the way how they're going to get there. And in both sides, I think it offers opportunity for internal audit to add value to the process, or at least to help them to preserve value. What we know for sure is that ESG is a reality. And Janis already walked us through on all the process and in terms of the regulation and what is the expectation about it. But investors, I mean, the real why behind all this is that we know that investors are considering ESG data as part of the investment analysis and decision-making processes. We know that for sure, and in the surveys, it's just coming over and over and over. What we also know is that consumers and employees are also indicating that they do care about ESG. In fact, there are some McKinsey study where in 2015, 28% of the millennials, they said that they care about ESG. And they did the same analysis in 2019, and 70% they said that they care about it. So the age of investors are also changing. So if there is only that we're going to be expecting here is more change. So in this slide, and I like this slide because again, I want to make sure that we can ask the right questions here, and I would love to engage you also on your questions. Is this slide is showing me based on the industry, right? Where is the materiality resides in terms of the environment, social, and governance? And in the other side, you can see what are those drivers. So if some of you are, for instance, in the healthcare industry, you could say that there is a significant impact from the social perspective. If you're in the financial side, you can say also there is a significant impact from the social perspective side. Conversely, if you go to the energy industry, if your company is part of that industry, you will see that there is a significant environmental activity for the energy sector. And I think this is going to help us, the internal audit, to ask the right questions. Say, okay, if my company is already mature and they already engaged somehow in a social responsibility report, we can ask those questions. Say, well, tell me, walk me through for that type of decisions. How do we know that we're on the right track? If we haven't started the process yet, my question would be, how do we know that we're engaging the internal audit in the right process? So it's kind of helping us to understand materiality. I know as internal auditor, that would always focus on what really matters, and what really matters is materiality. What are the numbers? This is going to be a little bit different because not everything could be measured in terms of dollars, but I think this report helps a lot to measure that activity. Janis, if we could move to the other slide, that would be great. Trends. We're always also looking for trends as part of the data. This is a report from Gartner, a survey made for Gartner. They issue quarterly reports to identify emerging risks. And at the end of the year, they show us what are those trends that have been shown throughout the different quarters that they exercise this survey. ESG is not new. We can see here that there were some concerns in terms of corporate responsibility in 2001. Now, 2002, we start seeing more concerns and more, risk as part of the environmental, social, and governance. So remember, this survey is always with boards, audit committee members as part of the board, and also executives. And this is top of mind for them. So one of the questions one of the things that we know for sure is this is material for a key stakeholders. And where are they as part of the audit program? We know also that there is some internal auditors, they're not still as part of the audit program. So the question is, where are they and what we could do to make it part of the ERM procedure? Janis, if we can move to the other, please. This is the quarterly report, and what we try to show here is consistency. So what we could see here is that there are 3 drivers related to ESG that are showing up on a consistent basis every time that they're talking with the board members. We can see about the climate activism, the number 1, ESG implementation challenges in number 2, and diversity and inclusion in number 4. So it's getting more and more relevance. The other thing that we know is disruption is a reality. 20 years ago, companies could last for many, many years with the same core business. Today, we know that there is disruption. And there are some surveys that somehow they show that on average, every 4 or 5 years, their business gets disrupted. I worked before for a company that their core business was disrupted, and it's changing the whole control environment. So we need to pay more attention as internal auditors to those emerging risks because they're changing. And it is our decision if we want to have a forward-looking mindset and identify those risks and help the companies to prevent and create controls to prevent those risks, or just focusing also only on the assurance part that are important. But we have 2 sides here, and that's part of the theme of this presentation, at least from the internal audit perspective. How can we add value, especially in this level of disruption that we're having, right now? If we can move to the other one, Janis, please. So this is kind of showing us from the opportunity for value creation. So we can see here what was the question from the Internal Audit Foundation that they asked, and it's how is internal audit involved in the organization of ESG program? And we can see that 35% of the people that we participate in the survey, they're not there yet. They're not participating. So the question is, what do we need to do based on where we are right now to start engaging internal audit in this process? If we can move to the other one, Janis. Another question as part of that survey is, what are the existing barriers for the internal audit environment to the ESG program? And some of them, they don't have any barriers to participate in the program. But look at what it says in terms of the data to support ESG audit. So we can see that there are challenges with the data when this survey was done, and it continued being powered based on what we noticed here in the survey as part of the process too. A lot of opportunities there that I just want to make sure that we as internal audit can capture as part of the process. And if we can move to the other one. In this slide, so is what is the confidence? And again, I like the data here. What is the confidence in audit's ability to provide assurance over ESG commitment? And we're seeing here that only 29% are highly confident for internal audit. So how can we help in this process? What do we need to do? to provide assurance and to show the business that we can help and work with them. So to wrap up here, I would like to leave with three questions. ESG is a reality. So what we are doing as internal audit to help the business, and how we're going to continue working with them to prevent any significant risks. The second question will be, are we being reactive or we're being proactive? Are we comfortable with the assurance side, or can we work shoulder to shoulder with the business to try to figure it out, an uncertainty that we're seeing here with ESG, because it's a lot of uncertainty still. And how can we work to create more opportunities for internal audit going forward, working consistently with the audit committee and with the board and the senior executives to improve the process. So with that, I know, I think that we will have some time for polling question number 4. Janis. And this is related to, that's your organization leverage internal audit for ESG assurance. Yes, internal audit is fully incorporated into our ESG risk management strategy. Yes, but only on a hoc basis. Or no, we don't have an articulated strategy for ESG, internal control and assurance. And the last one is no, we do not include ESG in internal audit scope of work. And we can see now there is, yes, internal audit is fully incorporated, 30%. Yes, but only on a hoc basis. So it's kind of a very, very even. So with that, I'm going to turn to Ian for the last part of the presentation. Ian?
Yeah, thanks, Jaime. Yeah, so interesting results on that last polling question. It looks like it's a little bit of a bookends, right? Like some people, yeah, internal audit is involved and engaged in it, some not so much yet. And then we have, some folks in the middle. So with the remaining time we have here, we just wanted to share some two additional slides with you. One I'm showing now is really just sort of an illustrative example of how you might frame this up, right? If you're in an internal audit department and you have a role in this, or you aspire to have a role with it, maybe it's worth having a conversation with the audit committee and revisiting your IA charter, because, leading practice would be that this is a very fertile ground for internal audit to add a lot of value, and really kind of do some kind of assessment activity, an arrangement like this or an approach. It would have to be tailored for any organization, but the activities that internal audit can do in terms of adding value are not really that much different from what you're probably already doing if you're involved in SOX, or if you ever have done work with your organization to help them improve the SOX program or SOX readiness, or if you've ever been involved in ERM and that sort of thing. Because ESG and the reporting that's coming, it's not unlike any other risk that needs to be managed by the organization, right? And there's elements of what's going to be required by the regulators, and the consequences of doing that poorly could be fines or sanctions and that sort of thing. And then even beyond the regulatory environment, as we've noted in this webinar, this is the type of thing that companies have been doing for years with sustainability reporting and that sort of thing. But if that's not done well, that comes with a big reputational risk. So voluntary disclosures, if not done in a well risk managed way, there could be the risk of greenwashing or false claims and that sort of thing. So just like any risks in an organization, there's a huge opportunity for internal audit to get involved and ask a lot of probing questions, which I'll share with you on the next slide. I'm not there yet. But really, diving in on with management and looking at their documentation and their policies and procedures and interviewing them, holding workshops, and eventually we're going to get to a point where testing controls associated with managing the data and ensuring the data integrity of what's being reported is going to become very important as well. And it's, again, very similar to what you would do in a SOX environment or any other internal audit activity where you really want to get some assurance around the quality of the information and the effectiveness of the controls associated with capturing all the data and so forth. So I see this as a huge opportunity for internal audit. And let's go on to the next slide where we have some questions. And this is not an exhaustive list, and you'll get this slide deck from us, but really asking really good open-ended probing questions of the management first or second line within your organization that is going to be responsible for the ESG program and the requirements that are coming from the regulators, as well as the voluntary disclosures and the things that you just want to say about your organization and the posture that the organization is presenting to the marketplace about how seriously they take ESG and what they say about themselves and how they project the responsible and sustainable behaviors that management and the board on down want to project out. So, diving into the governance and the risk management activities and processes, procedures, key risk indicators, all of these things, internal audit can be asking some really good questions about. And Janis shared with you a roadmap. So understand, where is your organization on that roadmap? Where is the maturity within your organization? And what are the opportunities for improvement? So a lot of folks said you've got ESG on your internal audit plan. That's great. I think it'll probably continue to be there for many years. For those that don't have it on the plan yet, give it some thought because as we've been saying, internal audit can add a tremendous amount of value by having these conversations and really doing, even initially, if it's some high-level assessment work, those of you that are complying with the IAA standards know that there's different types of internal audits you can do, some around assurance, some are more consulting in nature. In these early days, I would say consulting type internal audits are very valuable for the organization. And then eventually we'll get to more assurance around the integrity of data and testing of controls and all of that type of thing. And of course, eventually what's coming is more of an external audit attestation around this type of information as well. So you can see a lot of similarities to SOX with the work that management has to do, as well as what external auditors will do later. And I also, those of you familiar with SOX, again, public companies, 302 requires companies to do a lot of disclosure controls and procedures, typically through a disclosure committee. So it's definitely not too early to start asking, what is your disclosure committee doing around ESG and how are you going to adapt that disclosure committee to make sure that ESG related disclosures become a key part of that process as well. So we just are about out of time now, and hopefully you found this to be valuable. If there's any questions, throw them in the chat. We'll get back to you. We will share the material with you, but thank you for your attention today, and we look forward to hearing from you. And there's our contact information on the last slide.
Yes, well, thank you everybody for participating in our webinar today. We are up on time, so appreciate your attendance. And as Nicole mentioned, you'll be getting the slides, information, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Please feel free to just reach out to us and we'd be happy to answer. Well, this wraps up our session. Thank you for your time and have a great day.